and we are here playing in the sandbox of ideas. Hopefully a few ideas that will give you some tools in your tool belt to help you live a better and more aligned life. Today I want to talk a little bit about listening, because we're really bad at listening right now. And, part of it is our fault. We rely on a lot of misinformation, and we make a lot of assumptions when we listen to others, or we read and listen on the internet or our devices or wherever we may be. But then there are other aspects in which we are discovering some of the things we love so well, so much, is actually interfering with our ability to listen. In a way, today's podcast is going to be the first over several for next week. I'm going to continue on the listening discussion next week. And hopefully by the time we're done next Friday, we'll have a lot of fantastic tools on how to help ourselves listen. But today's kind of an overview of the process. I am putting a couple articles for everybody in the chat area. The first one is going to be from the Pew Research Center about how we've become a little bit of a partisan environment in this country, and probably all over the world, right? Because we aren't necessarily unique. And the second article is about something called transactional memory, which is a term often used in computer studies, but impacts humans as well. So listening. Boy, we got to do more of it, and we're not very good at it. And there's a lot of reasons we aren't very good at it, and that's okay. The first step in solving any problem is just to try to figure out what's not working and then make the adjustments we need in order to help things work better. When we are listening, there are three main things we're usually listening for. The first one is information. So informational listening. So you're sitting at a business meeting and a lot of the stuff being talked about has nothing to do with you. So you just listen for those pieces of information that are going to end up being important for your needs and your ability to do a good job. And that's a kind of informational listening. And we do it all the time. We listen to newscasts. We even we scroll through articles, for example. And we look through these articles to say, okay, what is relevant to me? And then we leave it at that. So that's informational listening. Then there is critical listening. And this is when we are listening only insofar as we're getting ready to reply, right? Some parts of critical listening is we're being critical about the information that we're receiving. But oftentimes it's like, what piece am I going to argue back? What piece am I going to debate back? What piece am I going to disagree with? And this is a very popular mode of listening right now, especially on places like the internet. And then there's empathetic listening. And that's, and I would like to rewrite this as compassionate listening. And I've talked about this a few weeks ago, that as much as I believe in empathy, and I really, really do, I believe the practicality of compassion kind of trumps it. Because with compassion, we have two elements. The first element is we are being empathetic. That empathetic layer actually exists. But we're also being a little bit of the observer. We're standing back. If we are fully empathetic, that means we are riding along the emotion with the other person. And when we're doing that, we don't give ourselves enough space in order to offer the type of replies that may be needed at the moment. So I would change empathetic listening to compassionate listening. And these are ideas we're going to go over far more specifically next week, specifically, I think, on next Tuesday. But we have a hard time today listening to each other. And we always have. I mean, this isn't new. Listening is one of the hardest skills. And it is a skill you will never totally accomplish. Even if you think right now, I am the best bloody listener in this world, I guarantee you there is a long road that you can still travel. And somebody like me who teaches listening, who teaches communication, I have a hard time listening too. And we have a hard time listening because there's all this noise that is going on. And we talked about noise and communication several weeks ago. So just a really quick review. We have physical noises, such as somebody honking outside of your house, or traffic noise during a conversation, too loud music. But noise can also be all the advertisements you see popping up, right, on your feed, on your news feed. So you're trying to read an article from the Washington Post and you've got, oh, this. I was looking at an article about why the show Bewitched was eventually canceled. And they had this great grabber headline that was like the episode that ended it all, right? And I'm like, oh, I used to watch that show when I was a kid. I watched all those reruns. I'm like, okay, well, I'll find out what it is. But the article was riddled with all this clickbait that you literally could not scroll without clicking on an advertisement. I tried to get through the article 3 times and finally gave up. That is physical noise. We also have physiological noise, and that's the noise coming up from our bodies, right? If we don't feel well, for example, we didn't get a good night's sleep the night before, these biological realities end up impacting how well we can listen, how well we can communicate, and of course, how well we can process information in general. The next type of noise is psychological noise. And now this is all that noise in our brain, our biases, our assumptions, the deep-rooted values that we're born with. These are all psychological noises. And you're saying, wait, deep-rooted values being a noise? Yes, absolutely. If your values, your deep-rooted values, interfere with your ability to listen to somebody else's point of view, it becomes noise. So psychological noise is probably the biggest form of noise that we experience as human beings. And then there's semantic noise, and that's noise about language. When somebody's speaking a different language than you may not understand them, even if they're, let's say they're from France, but they're speaking English to you, but their English isn't, technically really great. You may be struggling to understand what that other person is saying. As I'm working my way through Ayurvedic studies and meditation studies and some other and yoga studies, the Sanskrit ends up being a form of semantic noise for me, because I'm not familiar with the words, I'm not familiar with the sounds, and trying to get my tongue around these concepts and ideas, and when I speak them and when I think about them, can be really difficult. And that's semantic noise. And so those are the 4 different kinds of noises that we have in communications. And they really do interfere all the time, every day, every moment of the time. And it takes a lot of work to be really aware and be in the moment, be present, and be the observer in order to understand what form of noise is impacting you at that particular moment. But there are 2 forms of noises, I believe, I've come to believe, that interfere the most with listening. And that is A, physical noise, especially today. And I'll explain why I'm adding that. It's the first time I'm adding it, but I'm adding it. And psychological noise. So first, let's talk about physical noise. Physical noise is anything from your physical environment that interrupts your ability to consume, understand information well, to repeat information well, and to listen well to that information, no matter what kind of information you are receiving. And today, what we have are notifications from our news sources. We have notifications from social media, from games. I can't tell you how many times the Willy Wonka slot game tells me to come on back and play again because there's some free coins. So these notifications on our different devices create a great deal of physical noise, and they interrupt with conversations. They interrupt with our ability to read an article all the way through. When we're on the internet, again, all those advertisements popping out, that is noise. So we are surrounded by physical noise now in a way We have never been surrounded by physical noise before. It is a cacophony of noise. And every time you are interrupted, every single time you are interrupted. I don't care if you're a 16-year-old and you have a much more plastic memory than I do. Plastic meaning flexible, able to bring in information. I don't care. You're still going to be interrupted from your train of thought once those notifications, once those advertisements, once those flashy little bits of shiny stuff comes into your space. That interrupts your ability to focus. And as a result, it interrupts your ability to understand, to listen, and to communicate well. So all of these different physical noises have now come to a point where we are so absorbed by being interrupted that's literally our normal realm of existing, that our brains are no longer able to hold information for a long period of time. And people have been talking about how we have a lack of ability to focus for very long time. I mean, I remember when I was starting college, everybody was talking about sound bites. That's all we can hear is sound bite, a sentence here, a tweet here, an update here. That even when our friends put on a long update about something going on in their lives, we click it and we notice, oh my God, it's so many paragraphs and I can't respond well because I have to read all those paragraphs. So our attention span has become very limited compared to just what it was even 20 years ago, 10 years ago. It has happened. And I'll talk about the science behind that in a minute. So we have all of these noises in the physical realm, which really does interfere with us. And it really is largely because of the internet, because of our cell phones. Steve Jobs, not sure if you're in heaven or in hell right now, could be a foot in each place because it has impacted us to such a dramatic level and over such a short period of time that it's literally mind-boggling. The other kind of noise, and this is the really big one, that interferes with our ability to listen well is psychological noises, our biases, our assumptions, and also our ability to no longer retain information. So one of the things that's going on, so this is psychological with a little bit of and physiological noise as well. It does kind of both come together with this, is our inability to remember. Even now, when we're having a conversation, for example, with somebody, and they're telling us something important, but we get that notification, and we slyly bring up our phone, and we look and go, oh, I got a Snapchat from Brian. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, what were you saying? When that happens, two things are going on with us physically. One, the train of thought of the conversation we were having with the other person has been interrupted. Two, our mind was diverted from the first point of focus to another point of focus, thereby short-circuiting what's going on in our brain, our ability to remember the conversation at hand. I can't tell you how often I put my phone down. I go, shit, sorry. What were you saying? I wasn't listening. I was on my phone. I'm really, really sorry about that. So we have two different things happening, right? We have an interruption plus an interruption in brain processes that affects our memory. The other thing is we are exposed to so much information today, more information than my parents ever were exposed to, and they thought they were exposed to massive amounts of information. But the internet has just really given us information overload, and we can't remember everything. Even if we would like to, we really, really can't. So now we no longer use our memories the way we used to use them. Let me give you an example. How many of you remember your friends' phone numbers? Hell, I forget my husband's phone number on a regular basis. It's because I have given the memory over to this, my cell phone. I've given the memory of facts and figures over to the internet. I am allowing these different devices and resources to remember for me. And we call this transactive memory. Now, transactive memory is a term that has been used in computer science. But when it comes to humans, what it basically means is that I outsource my memory to somebody else. So if you ask, for example, your husband, hey, do you remember what happened when we got the cat his shots last? I can't remember what year that was. And he says back to you, oh, that was in, 2018. Then I've used him as an external memory source. And the more we are using external memory sources, whether we're asking a spouse, a friend, or a loved one, or a stranger to remember for us, or we're going to our phones or the internet, we are outsourcing our memory. And this outsourcing of the memory now is shrinking our hippocampus, literally shrinking our hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the center in which it pieces together all of our bits of memory and allows us to have an understanding of a timeline. Right? If that makes any sense. So the more we outsource our memory, the less likely we will be able to remember important things like our husband's phone number in the future. So that is one form of psychological / physiological experience. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but you can also see the article by Jason Palmer that I've placed in the chat area. The other part of psychological noise that is impacting our ability to listen is our biases and assumptions. Right now, we are living in the most partisan time. This country has always been partisan, let's face it, we are. But because of algorithms, because of how information is diverted to us, because the information diverted to us is normally information we want to see rather than contrary information to the way we think, we are no longer able to tolerate other pieces of information that doesn't fit nicely into our worldview. And this is impacting how we listen to each other. So I have another article in here about partisan problems from the Pew Research Center, more intense, more personal. And in this particular study that was done last year, we have found that Democrats and Republicans have an extremely poor understanding of each other. We don't trust each other. We assume that the other camp is closed-minded. 55% of Republicans and 47% of Democrats, and remember, this information is a year old, so it might be more extreme now. We view the other party as being immoral than other Americans. And that's a problem because I'm pretty much sure that you have somebody in your life who has an opposing political belief system than you have, and you like them. You probably go out to lunch with them. Now, you may not talk about politics. Who knows what you end up talking about, but you like them. And yet somehow when you're separated from that person and you're talking about those Republicans, those Democrats, when you're away from that person, you have a tendency to make them out as monsters. We all do. It's terrible, and it's got to stop because there is absolutely no reason why we can't start to have understanding of each other. It's really funny, but Republicans often will describe Democrats as being unpatriotic and lazy, and Democrats will describe Republicans as being unintelligent and closed-minded. And yet, if you think on your friend who holds a different political belief system than you do, ask yourself, do you believe that of your friend? Or do you go, oh, well, she is the exception to the rule. He is the exception to the rule. But you know what? They probably aren't. The problem is because our brains are so elastic, and this is why our hippocampus has shrunk so quickly over time since the introduction of the internet, since the introduction of cell phones and other devices that really does kind of take care of our memory for us now. This is why we cannot see people for who they really are, why we make stereotyped assumptions about the other. And we're seeing this all across our society, but such at a heightened sense of reality that we are destroying our society. We're destroying our political system. We're destroying our relationships. So the question remains, how do we listen better? Well, we're going to talk a lot more about that next week, but real briefly, just in case you want to keep this stuff in mind before we meet again Tuesday, if you are looking to listen for information, I highly suggest that you stop getting your information on the internet. You stop Googling for answers. You get off your ass and you find a library and a book. Now, I know it's COVID, so that's kind of difficult to do right now. Most libraries are closed, but their websites are open and you can check out a book. Check out a book. Stop looking up pieces of information if you can on the internet, because what you're doing is you're just harming yourself. You're harming your memory. You're harming your ability to maintain information. And that's problematic. It's problematic for us all. I had to Google again, transactive memory, and I've taught this idea, but I haven't taught it for a couple years. So I was like, what the hell is that term? If I would spend more time in my life not looking things up on the internet and more time reading articles, actual articles from scholarly and other reputable places in order to understand my information, then I'm going to remember it better. If you're looking for critical information, you're trying to listen between the lines. For every news article you read, for every person that you listen to, every political speech that you listen between the lines. What is not being said is probably the most critical piece of information you need to be aware of. And we do such a good job at only giving one point of view. We really do. We do a really good job. Even in this podcast, I'm doing a great job giving you one point of view. Now, if we listen to what is not being said, then it will lead us to questions that allow us to become that critical thinker. So always listen for what is not being said, what is being left out of an argument, and ask yourself simply, why and what is it? Why and what is it? It's two very important questions that you should always be asking yourself. And also ask yourself this, where did it come from? Where did it come from? Who wrote it? Who wrote it? Why should I trust this person's point of view? Ask yourself these questions. The other thing is when we're empathetically or compassionately listening, we really need to be present. And the best way to be present is to ask questions. Can you repeat that again? I don't quite understand what you mean about that. Can you explain more fully so I can understand within my context of living and life? Whatever it is, the more clarifying questions you can ask to another individual when you're trying to help them, the better it is. And the other thing is, don't give advice. Again, ask, are you looking for advice, or do you just need me to be here and to listen? Do you need me to yell with you? What do you need from me? And this alone will help you become a better listener. So today's meditation will be on, of course, listening. And I've got Kevin MacLeod here again today. It's Elf Meditation. And I want you to take a seat. Go ahead, just take a seat. You can sit in a chair, on the floor, or you can lie down on the floor, in your bed, on a couch, whatever is most comfortable for you, but a place that you can still be somewhat alert. I just want you to root yourself in your space by taking 3 deep breaths with an in count or an inhalation of a count of 5. Hold for a count of 1 or 2. And then exhale for a count of 6 or 7. elongating your exhale. This will really help relax you. It puts us in that parasympathetic nerve system of the rest and digest space. If you have any thoughts or any sensations, just notice that they exist, but don't get involved. Now, I want you to imagine one of the last conversations you had with someone where listening was a problem. It could be a conversation, but it also could be reading an article online. And I want you to identify for yourself what type of noise you experienced. Were you possibly interrupted by an alert of some kind? A notification? Did you get lost in daydreams? Were you feeling uncomfortable, sitting strangely, in a little bit of pain, so you found it difficult to listen? Or were you listening in order to debate back before hearing what that other person really had to say? Maybe you were conversing with somebody who comes from a different country than you, and the language barrier was difficult. Maybe you were engaging with somebody online, on social media, or a chat spot, maybe Reddit, and they were of a different political persuasion than you were. And so you simply chose not to listen, but to make assumptions. Now, I want you to remember or think about how you might have been able to cut through that noise. What kind of choices could you have made to create an environment where you could have been really present for the moment, really there, asking clarifying questions? For the next moment, just rewrite that memory in such a way that you become a good listener. It's vital that we become listeners now. We've spent a lot of time being talkers, and nobody is more guilty than myself. How can we better listen? My challenge to you today is to find one moment during your day, just one, in which some type of noise interrupts your ability to listen, and stop and make the correction at that moment. Identify the problem, think of a solution, and then reboot. I thank everybody who joined me this week. I'll be back next week, Tuesday through Friday, 9 a.m. Mountain Time. for Alignment with Rebecca, where we're going to continue to play in the sandbox of ideas of how we can just help ourselves live a little bit more aligned with the experience of life. Thank you. Aloha, mahalo, and as always, namaste.